As Trump's New York trial gets underway, his federal election interference trial has been stuck in neutral, waiting for the Supreme Court to decide if Trump is immune from prosecution. Arguments in that case are set for this Thursday. And 19 retired military leaders meaning nonpartisan, they are warning the court that this is not just about criminality, it is about national security. 3 of them join us tonight. Deborah Lee James served as the Secretary of the Air Force from 2013 to 2017. Ray Mabus served as Secretary of the Navy from 2009 to 2017. And Louis Caldera served as Secretary of the Army from 1998 to 2001. Thank you all for being here. This is really important stuff. People need to understand. Secretary James, in your filing, you say that Donald Trump's argument that presidents should have total immunity threatens to jeopardize our nation's security. Can you explain to our audience why?
Absolutely, Stephanie. We wrote this amicus brief, my colleagues and I, because we didn't want the Supreme Court to overlook in this very, very broad situation that there are important national security implications. It could be very detrimental to our national security because, number one, first of all, there are 3 principles that this is predicated upon. First of all, civilian control of the military. Second principle is the fact that the military is apolitical and will follow lawful orders from any president of any political party. They are above politics. And number 3, they are obligated to disobey an unlawful order. An unlawful order might be something like the order to attack innocent civilians in warfare, for example. That's what the My Lai situation was in Vietnam. If they fail to disobey such an unlawful order, they could be held liable for prosecution. And can you imagine a situation where the president is immune from prosecution, but the soldiers who carry out the orders are? It just makes no sense at all.
That's exactly what I want to get into next. So I want to lay it out a bit slowly, Secretary Mabus. When you look at the military, the brief points out that Trump's theory would undermine the president's moral authority as commander-in-chief because he wouldn't have to obey the law while the military he commands would have to do so. Walk us through that. How devastating would that be?
That would be incredibly devastating. So say you've got a group of protesters outside the White House, peacefully protesting, and the president didn't like it, and he ordered his military commanders to take them out. Well, then you put the military in an incredibly impossible position because either they have to follow an unlawful order and risk being prosecuted themselves, or they have to publicly disobey that order. And taking it one step further, what happens down the chain of command? What do the unit commanders, what do the colonels and the lieutenants, what do the sergeants and the privates do? They've got the commander-in-chief on one hand telling them to do something. They've got the top military leadership, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs say, telling them not to. What you would have is you would have chaos and you would destroy the U.S. military as a fighting force. You would also destroy the U.S. military as a defender of democracy and probably as a side effect, destroy democracy.
Secretary Caldera, one theme of this document is this massive warning against authoritarianism. A lot of Americans out there dismiss the concern of authoritarianism at home. They think we're alarmists when we bring it up. It'll never happen here. What would you say to them?
Well, it is important to our tradition of our Constitution is that no one is above the rule of law. And if the Supreme Court were to find that the president can violate criminal laws, then they would essentially be saying that the president is above the laws that are passed by Congress, that he can do whatever he wants that is criminally cannot be charged. And so that is to give him the kind of power that starts that decline toward authoritarianism here at home. And it certainly sends the wrong message to countries around the world where we're seeing populists take control of democratic countries and then change the rules to try to entrench themselves and act as authoritarians. We didn't want a king. That's why we didn't appoint a king. And we wanted the military to be subordinate to civilian control, starting with the president, but really responding to the will of the people through its elected officials. We didn't want a president who could use the military for his own personal purposes. There's an argument that's been made by some that the president, needs to be able to take bold action and not be afraid of prosecution. And we just think that that argument just doesn't make any sense in this context. Because first of all, the decisions that former President Trump are being charged with have nothing to do with wartime decisions, have nothing to do with protecting the national interest. That's not the case that's in front of the court, and it would be a mistake for the court to start to carve out exceptions for national security in this kind of case. It's also unnecessary because usually the president has the advice of lawyers from the White House, from the Department of Defense, Department of Intelligence, Department of Justice, that even in what you might call gray area decisions, and there have been many in the course of our history, where there are people who have a good faith belief that the president is acting within his authority to protect the nation and within the bounds of the law, and that is sufficient protection from anyone ever coming after a president and saying that he willfully, intentionally violated the laws. So there's absolutely no need to create a carve out. And if there's one thing we know about former President Trump and any future authoritarian who might become president or would be authoritarian, is that they'll take an exception like the national interest, and they will drive a truck through what it should be a very limited exception and claim that everything they do is in the national interest. That's what Vladimir Putin does. That's what Kim Jong-il does. That's what authoritarians do. They are the national interest. So anything they want, personal, political, partisan, otherwise, is by definition the national interest. We don't want to go down that slippery slope. We shouldn't want anyone to have that power. Conservatives should be concerned about a Democratic president who had the authority to violate criminal laws and to misuse the military for political purposes just as much as Democrats should.
Secretary James, today Liz Cheney wrote an op-ed for the New York Times where she's urging the Supreme Court to decide this matter quickly so that the federal election interference case can go to trial and Americans can see the evidence for themselves before the election. Do you agree with her?
I absolutely do. I have nothing but the greatest respect for Liz Cheney. She stuck her neck out big time while she was a member of Congress. She ultimately paid the ultimate political price for doing so. But to the extent that the Supreme Court can make a decision, do it decisively so that it is no longer in question. I mean, frankly, as an American, I never dreamed that such a matter would be in question. As you heard Secretary Caldera say earlier, the principle of no one is above the law in the United States is certainly one that I always grew up with, one that I continue to believe in. So for the Supreme Court to act quickly and decisively is essential. So I couldn't agree more with Congresswoman Cheney.
All right. Secretaries James, Mabus, Caldera, thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate it. When we return, our